Start off with a question, and just out of curiosity, how many of you have seen? I mentioned about the DVD, but how many of you have seen the presentation about this cover stuff? We talked to Tim Ballard when we came and spoke last night, but this is quite a bit different. I think you'll find it. But how many of you have heard this from the DVDs? Okay, all right. I think they're going to have. We've got some stuff at the end that. I think it's going to be kind of sobering. It's kind of an interesting factor, but I want to get to that point fairly quickly. So we're going to go through this first portion fairly fast, and get to the end where we can spend a little bit more time together and talk about some of the things, the signs and times and things that have gone on. That links what has been happening, what Doug was just talking about, and links it to direct things that are happening today. So the first thing I wanted to ask is, where is the first mention, the earliest mention of a land of promise anywhere in the standard works? I've asked it to many different people, including general authorities and friends and so forth, in all kinds of different positions in the church. And interestingly enough, most of them, where would you go typically to find the answer to this question? What book in the standard works would make the most sense to go look in?
Come on, Mark.
Huh?
Pearl of Great Price.
Okay. Well, Pearl of Great Price, yeah. I mean, when I thought about it, I thought it'd probably be like the Old Testament. That'd be probably the earliest mention of something, but it actually is in the Pearl of Great Price. But let's start off from the very beginning. One of the things I love is in the Book of Mormon, we have different accounts where they started from the beginning of man and worked down through world history, and that was actually one of the most powerful ways of doing missionary work. And I'm hoping that that's one thing that we can also do as we go through this. So where was the Garden of Eden? We know it was in Missouri, correct? So when Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, where would they have found themselves? Well, basically what is today the heartland of America. And the earliest mention of a land of promise is actually here in Moses in chapter 6, verse 17. And it says, and Enos, and who's Enos? We have Adam, who has Seth, who has Enos, and Enos has a son by the name of Canaan. He says, and Enos, who was a grandson of Adam, lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And Enos and the residue of the people of God came out from the land which was called Shulon, and dwelt in a land of promise, right? Which he called after his own son, who was named Canaan. So this original land of promise was named after Adam's great-grandson, whose name was Canaan. Okay, and the big question is where was this land of promise? Well, interestingly enough, we have an answer to that from Joseph Smith. Actually, I should say from the Lord through Joseph Smith in the revelation given in section 107, verse 53 of the Doctrine and Covenants, in which he says, the Lord said to Joseph Smith, he said that 3 years previous to the death of Adam. So how old was Adam approximately this time? Well, Adam lived to 930 years old, so he's now 927 years old. Okay? And he called all of his righteous posterity together, which included Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, all who were high priests, into the valley of Adam-Bayamim, and there bestowed upon them his last blessing. So had Adam and his posterity moved great distances away from where they had been expelled, or where had they found themselves in the heartland of America, following their expulsion out of the Garden of Eden. Or to rephrase that, did they go thousands of miles away after that happened? Well, there's no indication. In fact, all the indications are that all of Adam's posterity were still living in the general vicinity, so they could come physically to receive this special blessing under the hands of Father Adam. And interestingly enough, this was going on now for then over 900 years. So for over 900 years, apparently they stayed in the heartland of America. If that's the case, then brothers and sisters, where was the original promised land? It was here. That's right. I mean, that's a fairly simple and straightforward understanding. But they weren't going down into Central and South America. They weren't going into Asia and so forth, or Africa, those places. They were here in America. In fact, if anybody's looking for a sign, there's your sign. Okay? All right. And so do we know where Adam-Bayamim is located? And how do we know that? Is this a guesstimation? Is it speculation? Or is it revelation? And the answer to that is in Doctrine and Covenants, section 116, the Lord revealed to Joseph Smith that Spring Hill is named by the Lord Adam-on-Diamond, and Spring Hill is in Davies County, Missouri. This is very specific information. Is there, well, maybe somebody can come up with a 2 Adam-on-Diamond theory. Maybe that would be helpful. That way we can put Adam-on-Diamond in some other place besides where it is in the heart of America. But no, seriously though, this is an interesting thing because we know exactly by Revelation where Adam-on-Diamond is located. And it just so happens that that's where Adam did this blessing for his children, and the land of promise was named after Adam's great-grandson, who was one of the people specifically named to come to that blessing. All right, so this land of Canaan then is basically over here, right? You see the land of Canaan right there. Now, we don't know exactly where that was, but somewhere in the heartland of America. Now, what was this promise that God made with Adam and his posterity? Well, it doesn't say a whole lot about it, but basically it's this: as long as they're righteous, they get to stay here. It's pretty simple. But if they ever became sufficiently wicked, then God could not allow them to remain on this promised land. A land that had been blessed with all of the natural resources and everything, so that the promises that he's made to them, which we're going to talk about in more detail, could actually be fulfilled. And so we get down to the time of Noah, and we have the people are now in full-on apostasy. Unrighteousness is abounding in the heartland of America. And so God calls his prophet Noah, and he builds an ark made in America. unlike Titanic, again. and he gathers his sons and their wives together, and they embark on the Noah's flood. Okay, on the ark. So they get on the ark and they go. Now, interestingly enough, what does that tell you? Now this is a little side note here, but what does that tell you about the Noachian flood? Was it just a local event that happened someplace over in the Black Sea area? It had to be the entire earth, because America got covered by the water, right? But then they ended up where? Over in the mountains of Ararat, according to the biblical sources. Which means that it was, in fact, a worldwide deluge. But there are many, even members of the church, Latter-day Saints, who believe that the Noah's flood wasn't a real event. It actually was just a localized flood. If it happened at all, maybe it was just figurative. Okay? But in fact, the Book of Mormon specifically says when the floodwaters came off of this land, it became again a promised land. It had been polluted by the people who had been here. And that tells you another interesting aspect of it. It was originally a promised land. It became polluted, but did it lose its promised land status? We'll talk about that in just a couple minutes. So we have so Noah and his family. They actually arrive then in the mountains of Ararat, and his 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, break off into 3 different distinct groups. Japheth was promised by Noah in a blessing that his seed would exceed all. And he left, and when they arrived, they basically his people went up into the Asian countries. And they became what is today the Asiatic peoples of the earth. And do they exceed the number of the other 2? The Hamites and the Shemites? Yes. There are more Asians on the planet than there are any other people. But then he's also blessed that Ham, on the other hand, let's see, Ham down here. Okay, Ham actually he was married to Egyptus, and according to the biblical record, Egyptus had the bloodline of Cain in her, and so that's just how the black race made it through the Noachian flood. Okay, but then we also have Shem, and through Shem was what the priesthood line came down through Shem. We have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so forth coming down through the Shem line, Shemites or Semites. Now we get down to a point going through world history pretty fast here, because we got to cover a lot of world history, because when we understand the whole history of the world laid out, it becomes absolutely clear where the promised lands are located and how many there are. So we get down to the point where we get down to Abraham. And of course we know the story about Abraham and Isaac and how that Abraham was actually sacrificed Isaac. And I find this interesting because Isaac was a full-grown man. There's something wrong with this photo. Isaac was not a young lad. He was a full-grown man. He probably easily could have overpowered his father had he wanted to. But like Christ submitted himself to his father, Isaac submitted himself to his father. Now the irony here, I think, is interesting also, because what had happened to Abraham as a young lad? His fathers wanted to sacrifice him to an idol god, right? Now it's interesting, he says his fathers with an S. This is back in the time when people used to live these really long time frames. You realize that 7 of his fathers, his grandfather and great-grandfather, great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, they were all still alive when this was going on. Okay, so they were all kind of in cahoots with this sacrificing of Abraham. Of course, he thinks that's probably a good time to get out of town. Where does he go? Down to visit his, basically, cousins, if you will, down in Egypt. Right? So he goes down to Egypt, and there he learns about things. Well, then he comes back, and it's going on here with Isaac, and now a couple quick things about Isaac. First off, it tells you a little bit about the relationship that he had with Abraham. Now, Isaac, this is not new stuff for Isaac. Isaac probably every year at Passover and so forth, they've been doing these sacrifices and things. And so he probably knew what was going on. That's why he asked, well, where's the ram? And Abraham said, well, the Lord's going to provide one. And when they get there, Isaac's all pretty much, he allows himself to be set up as the sacrifice. He fully knows now what's going on. And yet he was also willing to do this. I find that the parallels there between Isaac and Christ even are pretty interesting there. But of course, we all know what happens. Abraham basically is stopped. The angel stops and says, no, there's a ram that's got his horns caught in a thicket bush down below here. And just go and get the ram. The ram will be the actual sacrifice, not Isaac. And so he goes and gets the ram. Like I said, it's got his horns caught in a thicket bush, it says, a thorn bush. And he comes back up and he uses that ram as the actual and true sacrifice. That's kind of an interesting thing. Earlier today, that Sister Let Reed, when she was speaking, she talked. In fact, remember the blowing of the shofar, the ram's horn? What is it about that? Why is the ram's horn a big deal? It has to do. It ties in with Abraham, and they blow that horn at specified times during these holy days of the laws of Moses stuff, and they blow that horn, and it's partially because of Abraham, when they found the ram, it's because of its horns that it was held in place. It was the gathering, and so forth. So they blow the horn as a gathering sign to gather to the place, to the sacred place. Well, that's why shofar is such an interesting thing there. But it's also interesting, just as a little side note here, when Christ was being crucified, prior to his crucifixion, they did something very interesting with his head. Remember what that was? They wrapped the crown of thorns and put it on his head, unknowingly indicating that Christ, just like the ram had its head caught in the thorns, unknowingly they were actually symbolically showing that Christ would be the actual sacrifice. They didn't even realize what they were doing in that case. Anyway, so it's a little information about that. So, quick question. Where did this event actually take place? Was it in a physical location? It doesn't matter.
Yes.
Well, it does matter because the physical location actually is right here. This is Mount Moriah, or also known as the Dome of the Rock in Israel. And that's where that happened. Now, it's interesting, those of you who've been to Israel, how many of you have been to Israel? Okay? One of the things that struck me about 2 or 3 years ago, last time I was in Israel, was just how barren this place is. I mean, it really has no natural resources. It has no, I mean, it's kind of strategically located, but it's not terribly strategically located. I mean, basically, the bottom line is that we have 3 of the most powerful religions on the earth that are willing to essentially fight and die over who gets to control that place. Have you ever wondered why that is? What's such a big deal about that place? You have the Muslims, you have the Christians, and you also have the Jews, and they all want to be there. You know what it is? Each one of those religions go back to Abraham, and they all want to be the people who are the partakers of this covenant with God that God made with Abraham because of his unflinching righteousness and obedience to God, and even being willing to sacrifice his own son. Which again, the irony there was that his fathers were going to sacrifice him. And then God asked him to do the same kind of thing. So what was this covenant exactly that God made with Abraham? Let's talk about that for just a second here. First off, he promised them a land. Now it said the land, here's in Abraham chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, it says, and when we passed from Jershon to the land of the place of Shechem, we came to the land of the Canaanites, and he says, this land of the Canaanites, he says, unto thy seed will I give this land of the Canaanites. Now also in Genesis, it says the same basic thing here in Genesis chapter 13. The Lord says, lift up thine eyes, Abraham, and look from the place where thou art, to the north, and the south, and the east, and the west. As far as you can see, to thee will I give this land, and it's to be for thy seed for how long? How long is forever, anyway? Forever's a long time. I can tell you that. Okay, so forever. We're going to get back to that in just a second. So this land of Canaan, now notice the difference in spelling here. This Canaan, the great-grandson of Adam, was spelled C-A-I-N-A-N. But the Canaan over here is spelled C-A-N-A-A-N. Phonetically, they're identical words. But they're spelled differently to differentiate between the two promised lands. One in the, technically this would be the old world, and one in the new world. But just so we don't get everybody confused, we'll go ahead and use the modern terminology. So this is the new world, Canaan, and the old world, Canaan. Now there's a second thing that God made a covenant with Abraham about. He said it was blessed with posterity. The greatest thing the greatest blessing, other than life itself and salvation, is what? The closest that we can ever become to being a God is creating children. If you think about it, science has spent billions of dollars and hundreds of millions of man hours and so forth trying to figure out how to create life from non-life. And it's never been done. However, we have the opportunity as husband and wife to create new life. That's a very godlike thing to be doing. And because we are in the image of God, that's one thing that we can do. That's the reason why Satan wants to use that power of procreation to destroy us instead of build us. But so posterity is one of the major things here. Genesis chapter 13 says, and I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth. So if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. And there's a few of them. This is the promise made to Abraham, right? So this is actually a group of Muslims reading from Mecca. Okay, so this is the Muslims coming again from Abraham as well. And then he says this. Now I want you to try to guess what is the blessing that is being discussed here in the scripture in Leviticus chapter 26. It says, then I will give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. So what type of blessing is this? It's prosperity. Yeah, their flocks and their herds are going to flourish. They're going to do well in the promised land. And this is going to be by covenant with God. God's going to give them this special blessing. And then it also said, and lastly said, I'm going to give you security. Security. In fact, here in Leviticus chapter 26, it says, I will give you peace in the land. You shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. So I'm going to get rid of all of the evil beasts out of your land. Neither shall the sword go through your land. It says, you shall chase your enemies, that they shall fall before you by the sword, and 5 of you shall chase 100. 100 of you should put 10,000 to flight. And your enemy shall fall before you by the sword. Basically, I like to call this God's iron dome. His shield of protection that overarches and protects the promised land. He literally will fight their battles for them, so long as they're righteous. These are some of the blessings. These are 4 of the primary blessings that are given to Abraham according to the Old Testament. So that brings us to a question then. So why then does the Lord bless his righteous covenant people while they're on these promised lands with posterity, prosperity, and security? Why would he do that? Because he loves them more than he loves all of his other children? They're just special? No, because God's not a respecter of persons. He loves all of his children equally. So does that mean that these really aren't that special? Okay? All right, well, actually, the Lord gives us the answer to it right here in Abraham chapter 2, verse 11. It says, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And in thee and in thy seed for I give unto thee a promise, that this right shall continue in thee, and in thy seed after thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed, even with the blessings of the gospel, which are the blessings of salvation, even of life eternal. Okay, so the important part right here, in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Basically, it's kind of like this. God is saying, you know what? I'm going to give you these 4 special blessings. But in return, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take my gospel to all of my other children. And in order to be powerful in doing this, you're going to need these blessings. That's why I'm going to give them to you. Why do you need the blessings of the land? Because in order to have a powerful missionary force, this is basically talking about an amazing missionary force here. That's what the blessings are about, brothers and sisters. It's all about missionary work. These blessings are being given so that missionary work can be performed. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, if we need to start off with the very basic needs here, the first thing we're going to need is establish a culture of righteousness. How many times in the scriptures have we had people who are the covenant people of God, but they're living in a culture of unrighteousness? But they don't have the freedoms that they need to have to be able to make the choices that will lead them back to our Father in heaven. And so God leads them out of that culture of unrighteousness, like Egypt, for example. And it leads them out of that to a promised land, like Canaan, for example, with Abraham. And then he establishes them in that land so they can teach their children. They can establish the laws, as Doug was talking about here earlier. They can establish the laws and so forth. They can have a righteous nation, basically, to be able to raise their children in. But then he also realizes that they're going to need a few other things here. Okay, they're going to need to have children. How are you going to have a powerful missionary force if you don't have people? Because the gospel is spread from heart to heart and from spirit to spirit. That's how the gospel works. And so you've got to have people, which means you're going to need to be blessed with children. The third thing you're going to need to have some funds, some funding. Is it expensive to have a powerful missionary force, a huge missionary effort? Yeah, it's very expensive to do that. So the Lord said, I'm going to bless you with all of the prosperity that you need so that you can accomplish that work. You're going to be blessed upon the land. It's going to yield of its increase. And you're going to prosper on the land. So you're going to give him that blessing. And the fourth thing he says, I'm going to bless you with security. Because even if you have the first 3 things, what happens if the nation that you're in is at war with other nations? Then instead of serving missions, those young people would be serving military, right? So God says, I'm going to put this shield of protection over that nation. And with those 4 blessings, you can create an incredibly powerful missionary force in order to do this. And thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Now, this happened with Abraham, okay? But if we follow down, let's go back to world history for a second. So we have Abraham, who has, we have Abraham over here, Abram, who has Ishmael, who has Jacob, and Jacob has how many sons? His name was changed to Israel, right? And he has 12 sons. And those sons divide up the land of Canaan into 12 different divisions, and they divide up this place. They each take a piece of land here as their inheritance, part of the land of Canaan. But like many families happen, they can't quite get along. The southern kingdom actually is trying to tax the northern kingdom, and the northern kingdom rebels, and so the northern kingdom, 10 of the northern tribes, they all form a union up there, and then the 2 lower kingdoms down here, kingdom of Judah becomes about here. They have the 10 tribes up here and the 2 tribes down here. But the 10 tribes are in a near state of apostasy. They are basically not following God's laws. And so God has to basically he has to roll back, if you will, his shield of protection over the 10 tribes, and he allows an incursion into their lands. At 722 BC, the Assyrians come in and they attack. Now the Assyrians are interesting people. The Assyrians were the first terrorists. They're the first people to actually use terror against the regular population, the civilian population. They were some of the first people to, when they would torture people and so forth, they would nail them up on trees or on poles, so that anybody coming in or out of the city on the main thoroughfares there could see that you better not mess with us, or this is what's going to happen with you. And that's terrorism at its start in the Assyrian civilization. And so the Assyrians attacked the northern tribes of Israel. Now, at first, the northern tribes of Israel actually are able to repel them, but not until they have sustained great damage. Their houses are torn down. The Assyrians would actually come in and they would cut all the trees down so they couldn't rebuild, and so forth. Well, they finally were able to drive the Assyrians, back onto their lands, but instead of humbling themselves before God and realizing that it's only really through God that we can have security, instead they actually they have an interesting thing that Isaiah actually talks about here. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 10. This is Isaiah describing the attitude of the 10 tribes following the initial attack by the Assyrians. They said this, Isaiah reads this, it says, "The bricks have fallen down, but we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores, which are the native trees of the area, have been cut down, but we will change them into cedars." In other words, a brick is a pretty good building material, but a hewn stone is stronger than a brick, right? So they're going to build with the hewn stone. The sycamore trees, the native trees there, are what they normally had, but cedar trees grow taller and straighter with stronger wood, but they're not indigenous, they're not native to the area. So basically what they're saying is that this is what they're saying loud and clear. They're saying, we are Israel, and we will not be humbled. We are going to rebuild. We're going to not just rebuild, we're going to rebuild bigger and stronger and better. We're going to build better than we were before. We're going to show the world that we're awesome. But nowhere in there are they trying to humble themselves, realizing that it's only through God's, his shield that we have protection. Yes? We're going to get there.
I knew he was going to say that.
So basically, this is the bricks have fallen down. He says these huge stones and so forth, and these sycamore trees. Okay. Now they did not humble themselves. They had been they've been partaking of all of these wonderful blessings of the Lord, but when it came down to it, they really thought it was all about them. And it's kind of a sad thing to see what happened. So basically, the Syrians, they come down, they attack the northern tribes of Israel, and this time, this is 7 years after this time, they come back, and this time, they come back with a vengeance. And this time, it didn't go over so well with the 10 northern tribes. They were driven off of their lands, out of their homes, off of the lands, and they went where? They went to the north countries. Now, what exactly do they mean by the north countries? Well, some of them went up into Europe. Some of them went up into what was Russia and so forth. Some of them, we don't know exactly where they went. We do know, however, that at some point in time, when they return, big things happen. He talks about that the ice will flow down to their presence, and there will be a highway cast up in the midst of the great deep, and they'll bring their prophets and so forth, and they'll come back. Okay, that's all other prophecies and so forth about it. But the bottom line is that they are now completely been removed from their promised land, the land that was promised to them by God through Abraham. Right? So they're now off the land. But the southern tribes, they're not too far behind in their apostasy. They're also moving towards that. And but they're still out there. And so God calls a prophet by the name of Lehi in the southern tribes to be able to try to convince them to change their ways before God has to remove them off the land as well. And of course they try to kill him and so forth. We know the story here. And so God provides a Liahona and leads Lehi and his family, along with Ishmael and his family, and leads them out of the promised land of Abraham just before the destruction happens. At 586 BC, this time not the Assyrians, but this time the Babylonians come in. And they attack the southern tribes of Israel. And those who are unfortunate enough to live are taken back as slaves to Babylon, which they are known for not being very nice to their slaves. Okay, so just so you know. so Babylon, they haul them back there. So how many of the covenant people of God are now on the promised land of Abraham? 0. Let me ask you a question. The covenant that God made with Abraham about the land, he said it was going to be forever. Is the covenant, is it on the land or is it on the people?
Land.
It's on the land. The covenant that God made is on the real estate itself. Whether the people are there or not actually depends on their righteousness. Now, there's parts of the covenant that aren't, but that land part of the covenant is a covenant with God on that particular land. It makes also sense then that might be the case here in America, with the covenant land that God set up with Abraham. So he leads Lehi out of this. So this is the captivity routes of the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And now the promised land of Israel, what we know as Israel today, is been swept clean of the covenant people of God. Now we have then Lehi. We know that Lehi travels down from Jerusalem. He goes down along the Red Sea. Over here it says that they traveled about 8 years, actually. After they got down here, they traveled east, maybe east from that time frame for 8 years. Now we don't know exactly where they took off from, but we think it's someplace in this general area. That was a CES map, by the way. And then we have this. Then we have the Phoenicia expedition. And just out of curiosity, how many of you have heard of the Phoenicia expedition? Okay, how many of you have not heard of the Phoenicia expedition? Okay, most of you have heard of it. Okay, so we'll just blow through this really quickly. But basically, the Phoenicia expedition is simply an expedition that has literally proven out Lehi's ocean voyage in the most profound way, using the natural ocean currents and a 600 BC replica ship. This one? This one. Yeah, this is just showing the global conveyor belt. This is from NASA. It's showing how the shallow, warm currents are going this way, and then deep currents go the other direction. So if you take off from Saudi Arabia and Peninsula right here, the natural currents are going to take you around Africa and up along this coast, and that's exactly what the Phoenicia expedition found out. This is the route they were going to take. This is what their plan was. Now, this is all being done because of the history of Herodotus. Back in 500 BC, Herodotus wrote about the fact that they had built ships and they were making circumnavigations of Africa from the Mediterranean area over to India, around Africa, and then back. And they were doing this, according to Herodotus, as much as 100 years before his time, which pushes it clear back to 600 BC, which is, guess whose time? Lehi's time. So Herodotus actually said that they were already doing these kind of routes. So it probably was not something that Lehi was completely unaware of. He probably knew about the routes because the Phoenicians, do you know who the Phoenicians were? Okay, you know where Phoenicia was? Yeah, Phoenicia is basically due west of the Sea of Galilee in Israel. If you go west over to the Mediterranean, that's Phoenicia. And the main city of Phoenicia was called Sidon, as in the river Sidon. Okay? Sidon means fish, the city of fish. Okay? So anyway, so this is the route that they were going to do. Now there's a group of non-Mormon. These were guys from the UK primarily, and they decided they were going to see if they could actually build a 600 BC replica ship and actually sail it and prove that Herodotus was correct, that they could actually do this. Well, how do they know what a 600 BC ship looks like or what it's built from? Because they've actually found about 3 different sections of these ancient ships in the mud of the Mediterranean Sea. They know exactly how they were built and what kind of wood they were using and how they structured the ships and so forth. Anyway, this is a whole 2-hour presentation. I'm doing it here about 2 minutes, so. But the bottom line is, so they built this replica ship up in Arwad, Syria, up here. They sailed it down the Red Sea over here onto the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. This is the route that they were going to take. Okay, this is the actual ship here after they got it built. Then they built it up here. They sailed down the Red Sea over here onto the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. They left Salalah, Oman on October 26th of 2009. Now, according to the Nephite record, they gathered fruit and honey in abundance. They all got aboard the ship and were blown before the winds, which tells you that they were actually being blown with the winds. They weren't going against the winds. They were going with the natural winds. When do you have fruit and honey in abundance on the Saudi Arabian Peninsula? In the fall, because it's north of the equator and it's similar to our seasons. And so if you, the equator is approximately right in here, so this is north of there, and this is so when they have fruit and honey in abundance, and I've actually verified that with beekeepers over there, and so we know that that's the case. The ship actually did the same thing. Basically, they took off in October, so it's after the harvest season. The Book of Mormon says that they gathered the fruit and honey in abundance, and they got on the ship.
Can you do that red dot on the other side a little bit?
Over here? Yeah, over here. Yeah, so basically Saudi Arabia is over here. They take off from over here and they come down this direction. Again, like I have a whole 2-hour presentation about this whole thing, which includes video of them building the ship and how it was built, what makes it different than other ships, why a 600 BC ship is different than an 1100 AD ship, for example. Yeah, it's in the 6 DVD set. It's called the Book of Mormon Evidence number 2 set. It's anyway. So this is the quickie version here. So they departed October 26th of 2009. They got down here to the Comoros Islands. Now that's kind of interesting. This word Comoros, does that sound like any place name in the Book of Mormon? Comoros, kind of similar. And Ryan already kind of said this, but I'll just ask you the question. So there's a capital city over here in the Comoros Islands. Does anybody know what the capital city is? Don't yell it out if you already know. I'll just spell it for you. It's Moroni. That is the capital city of the Comoros Islands even today. Okay? You can look it up online. Okay, so they go past the Comoros Islands. They get down here on March the 2nd of 2010. They get in a huge storm. The mainsail gets torn apart. They're in 6 and 7 meter tall waves. They're thinking that the ship's going to probably break up. They're really having a panic. But then about a day or so later, they're in fairly calm seas. The storm blows over and they're fairly calm. They're still sailing to the west, but they're looking at their GPS, and their GPS says they're going east. And so they had this big storm that came up through there, and the GPS was saying they were going the opposite direction, as they could actually see the sails going out this way, going to the west. They found out that they had sailed into the Southern Atlantic current from the Indian Ocean current, and the Southern Atlantic current was taking them backwards this way faster than the wind was blowing them that way. It's kind of an interesting way, but all right. But the bottom line is that they did these huge things. Of course, in 1 Nephi in chapter 18 says, there arose a great storm, a great and terrible tempest, and we were driven back upon the waters for the space of 3 days. These guys figured out a little bit quicker than that because they had GPS on there that they could see, that they could actually figure out. It took them about a day to figure out what was going on, though. So they departed Cape Town, South Africa, March 22nd, 2010. Why am I bringing this whole thing up? Because we need to figure out, at least to some extent, what Lehi's ocean voyage was. There's actually been videos that have been put out by the History Channel where they talk about Lehi's ocean voyage, and then they dismiss the church and the Book of Mormon because they said they contacted the Mesoamerica advocates about the direction that they would have gone. They said, well, they would have left from Saudi Arabian Peninsula and sailed around this direction and then gone across the world's biggest ocean, the Pacific, at nearly its widest point to make a west coast landing on Central America. And the History Channel, then they got experts. They said, well, that would have taken at least 580 days, which is just a couple of months less than 2 years. And the final statement in the documentary by the History Channel is the guy says, yes, a ship could make it, but the ship would make it with dead people, because you couldn't carry that much water and food for a group of 30 to 40 people for almost 2 years on that kind of a ship. All right. Anyway, so again, the church gets another kick in the teeth because of this incorrect idea. Yeah. But instead, if they would have contacted the Phoenician expedition before they did this, it's called "Who Really Discovered America?" That's the name of the documentary made by the History Channel. If they would have instead talked to these guys, or with our Heartland research, or we could have shown them that not only is it possible, brothers and sisters, that this could have been the route. It's no longer a question of whether Nephi could make it. Brothers and sisters, it's been done.
Have you guys contacted the History Channel to say, hey, we'd like to...
Well, once it comes out, it's pretty much over. I mean, they're not going to redo that. But yeah, we haven't. No, as far as the answer, we haven't contacted the History Channel to try to make that something different. But it is really a powerful thing. If you can see the whole 2-hour presentation, it is so powerful how this all happened. The bottom line is that. So now, how do I know about this? I actually, because I'm trying to make this briefer, or more brief, I should say. I didn't mention that I came onto this because of a fellow Heartlander named Keith Johnson. And Keith Johnson was actually on this expedition. He actually flew into the Comoros Islands. He flew into Moroni, or they call it Mononi over there. But the Mononi, the Comoros Islands, and he was actually with them down to this lake in Mozambique, where he disembarked and came back. But we were watching this as they went. Every day, or every couple of days, they would actually beam up information from their global positioning tracking system that they had online. It would automatically make it bleep on their website, and you could follow the transit as it was going through the oceans. And interestingly enough, I'm spending too much time on this. What we're trying to do here. The bottom line is that they departed Cape Town, South Africa on March 22nd, 2010. They're desperately attempting to get back over here to Africa, but the winds and the currents took them straight towards North America. And the bottom line is that they get over here, right here. This is the most westerly point in the expedition on June the 2nd, 2010, right here. At this point, brothers and sisters, they were 350 miles off of Puerto Rico in North America. They were making 100 miles a day in the ship. They were 3.5 days away from landing in North America if they wanted to do it. But Keith Johnson actually had made arrangements. He actually had made arrangements with the marina here in Florida and said, listen, if you'll just stop in Florida, we have made arrangements we're going to pay for your restocking of your food and your water and all that kind of stuff here in the marina. Kind of trying to bait them a little bit to come to Florida. I mean, how cool would that be? And the captain of the ship basically text messaged them back and said, no, our goal was not to show that we could go from Saudi Arabian Peninsula to America. We're trying to show that we could get back over here like the Phoenicians did. Okay? And so they continued up the east coast of America, about 400 miles and 500 miles off of the east coast of America. They then got to the Azores and finally ended up over here in Beirut, Lebanon, October the 12th of 2010. Okay? So this is, again, it's no longer a situation of whether or not this could be done. There's some really important aspects of this. The bottom line is that Lehi departed in October, just using the same date as the Phoenicia as a beginning point. Okay, they gathered fruit and honey in abundance, and they went October 26th, 590 BC is when they would have left, approximately. Now the other ship, the Phoenicia expedition, they were actually making stops all the way along the way, picking up supplies and other people. Other volunteers would come and work on the ship and be part of that expedition. But Lehi had all of his sons with him, and so he didn't need to stop. So they could have actually made this in 103 days if you take out all of the stops that they made along the way. That means that Lehi arrived in Cape Town, South Africa about February the 6th of 589 BC. He would have been rounding the tip of Africa, using again the same time frames as the Phoenicia expedition did. And then if they would have been trying to get back over to Africa, the natural winds and currents would have taken them on a trajectory like this, and they would have ended up, Lehi's potential arrival in North America about April the 10th to April the 15th of 590 BC. 589 BC. That's only 6 months. And again, I wish there, like in the 2-hour presentation, I have a bunch more information about this and how this all works. Why do we have them landing here? For 3 reasons. Number one, when Lehi arrived in the Promised Land, Lehi made a statement when they arrived. He says, "We have obtained the Promised Land." If this was the original land where Adam and Eve dwelt, did God just take him back to the original Promised Land? And if the promise is on the land itself, then it never became an unpromised land, right? So it was still a promised land. So God actually, brought them back over here. Number 2 reason why we think it's over here. This is where the natural wind currents would happen. Once they get across the equator, this is one of the things I thought was just fabulous. When they were trying to establish colonies over here, the Europeans over here, they had a problem. Because by the time the ice got out of the harbor, so that the ice doesn't destroy their ships when they get out of the harbor, they have to wait until late spring before they can leave. Once they leave, they get in the currents. The currents would typically take them down around this way, like Cortez and Coronado and Columbus and so forth. That's how they sail, out of Spain and so forth over here. But the problem is that puts them over here in America in the fall of the year. It takes about 3 months to get across the Atlantic Ocean on a sailing ship. So they arrive here in the fall, and guess what they do the first winter? They starve. Okay? That's why they had so much difficulty establishing colonies over here on the East Coast. But on the other hand, if you follow God's Leahona, and instead of going, they could easily, left from Israel, sailed across the Mediterranean, and then went into that route. That would have been a good route, right? But they would have shown up in a land that didn't have anybody to help them. Whereas the colonists, they had the Indians actually help them out a lot of times in the first winters. But the bottom line is that instead, he takes them down this direction and has them sail clear around Africa. It's kind of a long ways around. But you know what? Interesting thing is, when Keith Johnson asked him about what he should bring to wear to go on the journey, they said, "You'll need nothing but shorts and t-shirts." Because by the time we leave in October, in the northern hemisphere, it's now going into winter. But as we sail south, we sail across the equator, and now we're going into the southern hemisphere. It is now becoming summertime in the southern hemisphere. As they cross this, at the peak of summer, by the time they get to the bottom of Africa, now it's waning summer. Now they come up here, now they cross the equator, and guess what? They're sailing into springtime in the northern hemisphere. The temperatures are perfect the entire way. They don't have to worry about freezing to death or getting too hot. It's beautiful. Beautiful way to go, all right? And the nice thing about it is that they can do all this in 6 months. Well, we've got 103 days. That's about 3 months over here, and about another, 74 days up there, about 90 days, so about another 3 months up here. So approximately 6 months instead of 2 years to get them over onto the west coast. By the way, that's never been done in any sailing ship the other route. It's total speculation. And what happens when they arrive here? He says, "After we sailed in the space of many days, we would arrive at the Promised Land. And it came to pass that we began to till the earth and began to plant the seeds which we had brought from Jerusalem. And it came to pass that they did grow exceedingly." Now that's kind of an interesting aspect, and it's already been mentioned once before already today. But the bottom line is that they brought the seed from Jerusalem. How well would they grow here? Well, this is Jerusalem over here. This is Florida over here. It's the same latitude, within 1 degree. The Gulf Coast of Florida is. So it's nearly the same latitude. That means the seeds coming from Jerusalem would be in virtually the same climate as they are over in Jerusalem. And when they arrived here, then this is what God said to Lehi. Let's get back to the covenant stuff. Because behold, said he, "Notwithstanding our afflictions, we have obtained this land of promise, a land which is choice above all other lands, the land which the Lord God has made a covenant with me, should be the land for the inheritance of my seed." Okay? So when Lehi arrives here, he finds out that what? The whole time he's been told by the Lord that where are they going? The Lord's taking them to where? The Promised Land. That's right. And now they arrive there and says, "We've obtained the Promised Land." Okay, this land of promise. Well, what exactly was the Promised Land? And how many promises are there? How many promised lands are there? Well, for that, we're going to turn to the ultimate authority on promised lands, and that's Jesus Christ himself. Later on in the history of the Nephites, as the Nephites get down to the point where they become wicked and then Christ comes in 3rd Nephi, Christ actually says this from 3rd Nephi chapter 20, verse 29. He says, "And I will remember the covenant which I made with my people," his people. Okay? He was born over in the old world, right, in Bethlehem. He says, "And I have covenanted with them that I would gather them together in my own due time and give unto them again the lands of their fathers," including Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, "for their inheritance, which is the land of Jerusalem, which is the promised land unto them forever, saith the Father." Again, he's mentioning how long is that promised land going to be over there? Forever, right? And this is the land of Jerusalem. So this is the promised land. This is a covenant gathering place forever for the house of Israel. But then, here's Jerusalem right here, here's Canaan. But then he also said this is, again, Christ. In the same chapter, talking to the Nephites, he says this, "Behold, this people will I establish in this land." Now, who's the people he's talking about here? Specifically, he's talking about the Gentiles who are going to come and occupy their lands at some point in the future. He says, "This people, the Gentiles, will I establish in this land," the land that he's on, that the Nephites are on, "unto the fulfilling of the covenant which I made with your father Jacob. And it shall be a new Jerusalem." So now we have Jerusalem, New Jerusalem, Canaan, Canaan. Does anybody see a pattern developing here? Okay. Hopefully you can see that. All right, then we have section 84. It says, this New Jerusalem, that the Lord revealed exactly about this New Jerusalem. He says, "The city of New Jerusalem shall be built beginning at the temple lot, appointed by the finger of the Lord in the western boundaries of the state of Missouri. And the city of New Jerusalem shall be built by the gathering of the saints, beginning at this place, even the place of the temple." So here in Hebrew Document Covenant section 84, this is a covenant gathering place for the house of Israel. This is the place of the New Jerusalem. Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is going to be built, brothers and sisters. This is critical. The reason why I say that is because, is this speculation? Or is this revelation? And if this is revelation, and the New Jerusalem is going to be built in USA, then we have a couple of scriptures that we need to reconcile here. Now this talks about the New Jerusalem will also be called Zion. That's a city of refuge, a place for safety for the saints. In fact, it says it shall be called Zion, the New Jerusalem. It's going to be a holy city. And we all know about the Articles of Faith number 10, that we believe in the literal gathering of Israel and the restoration of the 10 tribes, that Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be built here. It used to say here on the American continent, right? On this American continent. All right. But what exactly is Zion? Well, again, we don't have time to go into all the details. But if you look up Zion in the Bible dictionary, Zion says, the first definition says the pure in heart. But then it has several other definitions for a physical location, like Jackson County, Missouri, for example. Okay, and Adam on the Island talking about that. And then at the very end it says, in a broader sense, all of North and South America is Zion. And that's an interesting one because all of the previous definitions in the Bible dictionary have a scriptural basis to them. In other words, they have a scripture at the end of it to back up what they're saying, except for that last one about North and South America being Zion. That one doesn't have a scriptural reference to it. It has History of the Church, Volume 6. So I looked up History of the Church, Volume 6, and it was Joseph Smith in an annual general conference of the church on Monday, April the 8th of 1844, in which Joseph Smith says, you know, there's been great discussion in relation to Zion, where it is and where the gathering of this dispensation is, in which I am now going to tell you. You think some people listen up pretty close now? Joseph Smith said, I'm going to tell you where Zion's at. But instead of telling him directly, guess what he does? He kind of couches it just a little bit. He says, the prophets have spoken and written upon it, but I will make a proclamation that will cover a broader ground. The whole of America is Zion itself, from north to south, and is described by the prophets who declare that it is the Zion where the mountain of the Lord should be, and that it should be in the center of the land. And when the elders shall take up and examine the old prophecies in the Bible, they will see it. Now, Joseph Smith gave 5 qualifiers there. Let's go over those qualifiers very quickly. First qualifier says the prophets have spoken and written upon it. Brothers and sisters, if the prophets have spoken and written upon it, where is that in the scriptures? Where is there any scripture that talks about North and South America being Zion? I've never seen anything like that before that says North and South America is Zion. So if the prophets have spoken and written upon it, they weren't necessarily identifying North and South America. He says the whole of America is Zion itself, from north to south. Well, what exactly did Joseph Smith mean by America? Well, if you look at Wikipedia, it says that in the English language, the Americas, plural, refers to the landmasses of both North and South America, whereas America, singular, refers almost exclusively to the United States of America. So if somebody says, I'm going to America, and they're from some other country, what nation are they going to? They're coming here, right? They're coming to the United States. But that's really not important. What really is important is, what did Joseph Smith mean by America? When he used the term, what did he mean? Well, here's a couple of clues from the Evening and Morning Star from December of 1832. He said, the Book of Mormon declares that the land which is now called America, singular, is a choice land above all other lands. And we believe it because the Lord has seen it and we've seen it. The Lord has said it and we've seen it. At present, the world thinks much of America because it, singular, is trying the experiment of a free government. Brothers and sisters, is all of North and South America trying the experiment of a singular free government? No. So how could this be all of North and South America then? He says, and the people of the Lord are beginning to lift up their heads and rejoice because Jesus the Redeemer is setting up his kingdom upon this choice land above all others, and it is no more to be confounded. Is the Lord setting up his kingdom in Guatemala or southern Mexico? No, he's setting it up in New York, and in Ohio, and in Missouri. He says, and what exactly does it mean from north to south? Well, interestingly enough, this is about the same time as Joseph Smith has the revelation known as Doctrine and Covenants, section 87, which talks specifically about the civil war that will be soon coming, where the southern states are being divided from the northern states, right? And the southern states have all but seceded from the northern states. I mean, they're actually making deals with the other countries by themselves. They have their own monetary system. For all intents and purposes, they are separated now from the northern states. And Joseph Smith already knows this in a revelation that he had. So is it possible that when Joseph Smith said the whole of America is Zion itself, north and south, he wasn't talking about North and South America. He was talking about the southern states and the northern states. Those two combined are Zion, and that's the America that we're talking about here. Well, it says it's described by the prophets. That goes back to number 1. The prophets, where have the prophets described North and South America as being the promised land? And it says it would be where the mountain of the Lord should be. Well, what and where is the mountain of the Lord? Well, here in 2 Nephites chapter 12, it says that there shall come to pass in the last days the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains. Where is that at? We're here. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Right? Okay? So, out of Zion, they're talking about the last days and also into the millennium. During the millennium, the law will come forth from here, and the word of the Lord will come from Jerusalem. All right, and then he said it would be in the center of the land. Okay, we've got a husband there, we've got lots of stuff to cover here. Okay, so it's being in the center of the land here. Now, when that's the center of the land, what does that mean? Zion is in the center of what land? Well, here's a clue in section 57. It says that this land, which is the land of Missouri, this is the land of promise and a place for the city of Zion. And independence is the center place. And when Joseph had this revelation, what exactly did he mean by that? Independence is the center place? At that point in time, independence was on the very far western edge of civilization. You go a little bit further than independence, and you're in Indian country. You're in like no man's land. So when Joseph Smith received this revelation, he's probably thinking, well, good grief, what is this? But do you think that the Lord knew what this land was going to ultimately become? Of course he did. And so independence is the center place. And if that's the case, if the United States is the land that we're talking about here, is independence in the center of it? Yeah, it's pretty close to the center of it, right? All right. Okay, we talked about this. The Zion, New Jerusalem is up here. If North and South America is Zion, then is that in the middle of it? Not even close. All right, but we got to get further on here. So, okay, last couple of quick things here, and then we've got to get onto the covenant stuff here. Then we'll finish up here. So we're about 20 more minutes or so. Is that okay? All right. Or 30 or 40 or 50. All right. So this is, I love this. This is a double prophetic witness. This is, Ether is now, I mean, he's a prophet, right? He's with the Jaredites. And Ether testifies to something, and then Moroni actually backs up Ether's prophecy. He says, behold, Ether saw the days of Christ, and he spake concerning a new Jerusalem upon this land. That's interesting. Does that mean that the Jaredites lived on the land which one day would become the New Jerusalem? And if that's the case, does that tell us really where the Jaredites were located? And it says, and that a New Jerusalem should be built upon this land, under the remnant of the seed of Joseph, which is now the Nephites he's talking about here, because the Jaredites weren't the seed of Joseph, right? So he's talking about now the Nephites. He says they're also going to be on the same land. So now we have a double prophetic witness that the Book of Mormon liberty thing. Oh wait, we're going to have to do that just a little bit so you understand the end of it. Because at the end of it, we want to get into the significance of things like 9/11 and what happened after that, and the stock market crash in 2008. So if you can hang on there for just a couple minutes. We need to hit this point though. Is there any difference between freedom and liberty?
Yes.
Okay? Well, if you actually, Noah Webster got it right, the Book of Mormon even got it more right. It's the best definition of between freedom and liberty that I've ever seen. It's from the Book of Mormon. This is Noah Webster. He says that being free means not being under necessity or restraint, physical or moral. No restraint, including no moral restraint. Freedom is basically your ability to do anything you want to. That's freedom. Okay? It says it's a state of exemption from power or control of another. Liberty, on the other hand, is freedom from restraint in a general sense, but natural liberty consists in the power of acting as one thinks fit without any restraint or control except from the laws of nature. Well, who made the laws of nature? God did. Right? Religious liberty is the free right of adopting opinions on religious subjects and worshiping the supreme being according to the dictates of conscience without external controls. In a general sense, whatever is made or produced in a world that comprehends all the works of God. Okay, this is Noah Webster's Dictionary again, 1828. Talk about nature, and nature is things that are produced by God. So the laws of nature are the laws produced by God, right? And let's see, let's go on with this law. Okay. Let's see. We need to go through that. Let's see. Okay, and this is the best definition I've ever seen right here. 2 Nephi chapter 2, verse 27. Wherefore men are free according to the flesh. We can choose to be good or evil. But they are free to choose, and it gives two choices. Choice number 1, liberty and eternal life. Choice number 2, captivity and death. Brothers and sisters, liberty is a conscientious choice to obey God's law. That's the difference between freedom and liberty. It's interesting because if you think about it, in the Book of Mormon, you have Moroni, the earlier Moroni, Captain Moroni, and he took off his coat, right, and he wrote on it, what do you call that? The title of freedom, right? Oh, no, it was the title of liberty. Yeah, and in the harbor in New York, there's a statue, and she's holding up a torch, and she's the statue of
Freedom. Liberty.
And there's this bell in Philadelphia, it's called the Liberty Bell. You know, we have actually searched this, and we found out that at no time did the Founding Fathers ever call this the land of freedom. They always referred to it as the land of liberty, meaning loud and clear that this land is free to choose, and we choose to obey God's law. That's liberty. Okay? It'd be a nation above all other nations, it talked about. And these are the two lands of promise, the two covenant lands. It talks about, it prophesies in 2 Nephi that this land shall be a land of liberty unto the Gentiles. There will be no kings upon the land. That tells you right there that it's being governed by some other form of government besides the king. Right? Okay? And it says that he beheld the Gentiles gone forth out of captivity, were delivered by the power of God out of the hands of all other nations, which tells you that it is a nation that is among other nations. It's not all of North and South America. It's a nation within North and South America, but it's one of those nations. And of course, then it says here, we see 2 Nephi, Lehi invoking the covenant with God anew on this land. And Tim Ballard actually talked about that, about George Washington. We should get to that in just another second here. And so be that they shall serve him according to the commandments which he has given. It shall be a land of liberty unto them, that shall never be brought into captivity. You see parts of the covenant. What are the 4 parts of the covenant? The land itself, posterity, prosperity, and security. So what are these? They're talking about liberty and captivity. Okay? It'll be a land of liberty, and they'll never be brought into captivity. That's the security clause. It talks about the choice land being the New Jerusalem again here. The only nation that fulfills every Book of Mormon requirement to be the promised land is the United States of America. This is not just to be rah-rah USA. Brothers and sisters, there is a sacred covenant with God, established by Adam, re-invoked by the Jaredites, invoked, I should say, re-invoked again by Lehi and his family. But one of the interesting things about this covenant is when they become sufficiently wicked, God's going to sweep them off the land, just like Doug Brindley just was talking about. He's going to get out open up the broom closet. Okay? Well, we all know what happened with the Nephites. So was there another time in history that this covenant was re-invoked? But before we get to that, I just want to make this one. This is a beautiful thing. This is Elder L. Tom Perry in the Ensign of December 2012. There's a whole story I can tell you behind this, but he just said the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is truly a worldwide church. Nevertheless, it's important to realize that the church could never become what it is today without the birth of a great nation, the United States of America. And he said the most profound, clearest statement I've ever seen about this. He says the United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon. It's a place where divine guidance directed inspired men to create the conditions necessary for the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that restoration involves the biggest missionary effort in the history of the world. The restoration of the gospel. And today we are the recipients of that. 83,000 missionaries right now. Right, so what was this covenant again? I just mentioned those things. The land, posterity, prosperity, and security. Interestingly enough, guess what is embedded in the Constitution of the United States? In the preamble of the Constitution are all four aspects of the sacred covenant with God. If you read that, it says, we the people of the United States, in order to reform a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America, right? Okay, as you go through that, look at what's included. The land, posterity, prosperity, and security. All of those things are included in the preamble of the Constitution. This is invoking a new covenant, again, with God on the same covenant land. Was this document inspired? Well, who was it that actually takes credit for its creation? Christ himself did. Yeah, he says, for this very purpose have I, the Lord, established the constitution of this land by the hands of wise men whom I raised up for this very purpose. And of course we know about the founding fathers coming to Wilford Woodruff in the St. George Temple. And this is the St. George Temple Registry. If you take a look down at the bottom here, you have, there's George Washington, right there. See him? Right here. There's George Washington, the first one to be done. Here's several other of these, of the founding fathers. For example, you've got John Quincy Adams, you got, Zachary Taylor, Willard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce. Oh, look at that. There's Abraham Lincoln right there as well. Here's another page. And then it had, there's Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Rush and others. There's eminent men and eminent women and scientific people as well as the founding fathers who were all done on that day. By the way, that was on August the 21st in 1877 at St. George Temple. What's the obligation associated with the covenant? That's it. Brothers and sisters, that's it. The nation, this is a national covenant that Tim Ballard was talking about. There's personal covenants that we all make, but there's a national covenant, and this is invoked by whoever the leader is, right? And they have and the nation receives all of these blessings as long as they do one thing, which is actually subdivided into 10 smaller things. Okay, so they have to live the 10 Commandments. That's the deal. And we already talked about the 10 Commandments and how well we're doing with that as a nation today. But it says, now this is Lehi. This is just showing that Lehi understood the nature of this covenant. He says, I have obtained a promise. As long as we keep the commandments, we're going to prosper. We'll be kept from other nations. As long as we keep the commandments, we're going to be blessed. Nobody's going to molest us. We're going to be safely forever, and so forth. So did Lehi understand the nature of this covenant? Absolutely did. There's a few more things there. Joseph Smith also talked about the Constitution. And we don't have time to get into that. So this is the most important thing. This is the reason why this covenant was made, so that the restoration of the gospel could be accomplished here in America. And God bless this nation with everything that it needs to be able to make it a powerful nation. And this has been an amazing covenant. In fact, this covenant was invoked by none other than George Washington. On the inauguration day in 1789, they went to the Federal Building, and then after that they went to a stone church called St. Paul Cathedral, which still stands in downtown New York. This is not done in Washington, D.C. There was no Washington, D.C. at this point. Now, according to historical sources, George Washington put his left hand, he opened up the Bible, he put his left hand on a very specific verse in Genesis. Genesis chapter 49. He puts his left hand on that verse, he puts his right arm to the square, and he invokes a sacred covenant with God on this nation as its first rightful leader. Now, interestingly enough, it was in Genesis chapter 49, verse 22. And what does it say there? It says, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. See, the family fathers understood that they were some of the 10 tribes that had gotten dispersed by the Assyrians back in 722 BC. Some of them have gone up into Europe. And some of them have now come over the ocean or over the wall into what is now America. They talked about, the founding fathers, actually many of them talked about a new Jerusalem, which was one day be built on this land. And so forth. And they were coming over the wall or over the ocean to establish this, and George Washington invokes this covenant anew on this covenant land. Again, was the covenant there? Well, this is the stone church. It's still there today. It's the St. Paul Cathedral. Now, at the time, historians have gone back and they found out that this church was actually owned about 3 or 4 acres of land at the time when this covenant was invoked by George Washington. Later on, it sold out some of that land. That land got sold a couple of other times. And then a big developer decided to build a couple of buildings on that piece of property. This is the stone church, as you can see it today. You can see it over here. You see the steeple is kind of unique, so you can kind of see what we're talking about here. This is St. Paul Cathedral in downtown New York. You see the steeple here? What are the 2 buildings? You see the developers that bought the property from the church, then they sold it a couple times. They ultimately decided that they were going to develop it, and they decided to build 2 buildings. 2 identical skyscrapers that would become the icon of New York. And because New York is the biggest city in America, it would become the icon of America. And interestingly enough, the place, the actual physical location of the invocation of the covenant with God on this nation became the place of judgment of God on a nation who is turning their backs on him. So we have the 2 towers come down. Interestingly enough, the North Tower, when it comes down, the blast wave is so great that it blasts out doors and windows and walls of buildings on either side of the stone church. But the stone church was actually surprisingly survived with only very minimal damage. Okay, I mean, not even windows broken out or anything like that. Blew a few shingles off the roof and that kind of thing, but it was really pretty amazing. Remember how the attitude of the covenant people back in the time of the 10 tribes, Isaiah records that the bricks have been thrown down, but we're going to rebuild with hewn stones. He says the sycamores have been cut down, but we're going to plant cedar trees in their place. It was an attitude of defiance, not one of humility. Guess what? Right after 9/11, we have our Senate Majority Leader and the Mayor of New York and the Governor of New York. And interestingly enough, most of them, several of them, actually about 4 of them, invoke the Isaiah 9:10 prophecy. Which, by the way, you have Isaiah 9:10 and number 11. So that's also, if you want to remember that, it's just Isaiah 9:11. Okay? That's how you can remember that. Okay? The prophecy here. Okay? So, interestingly enough, this is what the towers looked like before. And there's a big plaza down there at the bottom of it. At the bottom of the plaza, if you take a look at that big gold ball here, there's the plaza right there. And these are all pavers. Pavers are made out of what? They're bricks. This is what it looked like after the towers came down. The brick plaza was completely destroyed. Right? But they decided, you know what? After the dust had cleared and they started to haul the stuff out and so forth, they got most of the victims out there and so forth, and they began to decide, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do as America? Are we going to cower down? Are we going to say we're going to rebuild? Okay, we give. no, what did we say? We said, we are America, we are awesome, and we're going to rebuild. But guess what? We're not going to just rebuild. We're going to rebuild with a vengeance. We're going to rebuild with defiance. We're going to build bigger and taller and better. We're going to show the world how awesome we are. But never coming back and realizing that the only security that we have is with God. So for a while we come back to our churches. For a while we start going back to our churches on Sundays and so forth, and we start reading the scriptures again, but it doesn't last for very long, does it? Well, interesting enough, that last way when it came down, the thing that saved the little stone church, the St. Paul Cathedral, was several huge old trees that was standing in front of the church. When the blast wave came down, it hit those trees so hard it literally jerked them up out of the ground by their roots. The roots were sticking up out of the ground when they found it. This is some of the other trees. You can see the destruction that happened from the blast wave. They decided that they were going to they had a big celebration here. This was on July 4th of 2004, so this is 3 years after. They said, we've finally gotten all the debris cleared away. We're going to start the reconstruction. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to show the world that we're not going to be brought down by this. So where the brick plaza was, we're going to bring in a hewn stone from the Adirondack Mountains, a 10-ton solid piece of granite. And that's going to be the basis of the new Freedom Tower. Oh, wait a minute, did I say Freedom Tower? They didn't call it the Tower of Liberty, did they? What did they call it? The Freedom Tower. Brothers and sisters, do you realize that by calling it the Freedom Tower, that it's literally saying loud and clear that our new building, the biggest, tallest building, the new icon of New York, which is the biggest city in our nation, that new building is going to be the Freedom Tower, which means that we will not be under your law. We are free to choose, and we choose not to be under your law. It's literally an affront to God. And it's saying loud and clear, America is no longer under your law. This is no longer a Christian nation. Right? So they had this big thing, and they had this big piece of granite in there, and so forth. Well, they actually had a sculptor that made this sculpture here of the ripped out roots of the tree. Here, the tree has been taken out by the roots. Well, somebody donated a tree to put in the place of the trees that got blown out. The trees that got blown out, by the way, guess what kind of trees they were?
Sycamore.
They were sycamore trees. And the trees that were donated was a cedar tree. And they took out the exact spot where the sycamore tree had been that had saved the church. And they took it out, and they put the new cedar. This is they're bringing in the cedar tree here, okay, to plant it. They call it the tree of hope. This is the new hope for America. We're planting this new tree, and guess what? 2 years later, the tree of hope was dead. It didn't survive the transplant. You can't make this stuff up. All right. So they had the cedar tree and so forth, right? And where the brick plaza was, and then they ended up building the tower. Now, this is the other tower. This is the tower this is the top. This is the piece that sits at the very, very top of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., the capital, the official capital of the United States of America, right? There will never, ever be any buildings built in Washington, D.C. taller than this. And that's by law. That's by statute. And what's on that? It actually says Laus Deo, which means praise be to God. That's what they wanted to have emblazoned on the very highest structure in the capital city of the United States of America. In fact, there's kind of a bad picture of it, but that's Laus Deo. It has emblazoned on that thing. Now, they had when the Freedom Tower got to a certain point where they were putting the very tallest beam. This will be now the tallest beam on the tallest building in the biggest city of America. Okay, and so they had another big thing, and they had President Obama actually came out for this one, and they said you need to write something symbolic on the tallest beam before we haul it up to the top of the building. And so he did. So he put, "We remember rebuild, we come back stronger. Another time invoking the Isaiah covenant on our nation. And there's the new Freedom Tower. Okay? As it's going up. And we can go into the new matter, the earthquake sequence. We're not going to go into that. In fact, I'm just going to kind of close here with this information. So what happened then? Now, how many of you know about the Shemitah year? Okay, we're just about done. The Shemitah years, every 7-year cycles, right? And with these 7-year cycles, interestingly enough, what happened 7 years, almost to the day after 9/11. Now, interestingly enough, when you look at it, scripturally, you have these 4 blessings. Okay, remember the 4 blessings are. And what I found was just astounding is that when the people become wicked, and the covenant people have been so blessed to live on this covenant land, when they became sufficiently wicked, then God started to withdraw those blessings. In His infinite mercy, He started to withdraw those blessings so that they will return their hearts and their minds back to Him. So the first thing that He does is He takes away their security. Usually there's a breach of security, like the Assyrians or the Babylonians. Okay? If that doesn't humble the people, then He has to go to, I like to call it phase 2. He starts to take away their prosperity. And what happened 7 years, almost to the day after 9/11? The biggest stock market crash in U.S. history. The stock market dropped 777 points that day. 7 is the numeral for judgment in the Hebrew in the Hebrew. So that's an interesting thing. Judgment, judgment, judgment. And then 7 more years go past. And then this was last year, 2015. Those of you who have been in the preparedness industry know that there was a big year last year because of all this stuff. How many of you have heard of the lunar tetrad? The blood moons. 4 blood moons in a row on Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles of the high holy days of the Hebrew calendar system. And so you have a blood moon in the spring, you have another blood moon in the fall. The next year is followed again by 2 more blood moons, and every time that's happened, big things have happened to Israel and to the covenant people and the covenant lands. And everybody's kind of disappointed because really nothing happened last fall. Everybody was expecting there's going to be a huge collapse, and all these problems, people were buying food stores like crazy and getting prepared. And what happened? Nothing. Or did it? If this pattern holds, and we have the revocation of our security clause, and then revocation of the prosperity clause, then what comes next?
Posterity.
The posterity clause. And guess what happened last fall? About the same time as the blood moons and all that kind of stuff was going on?
Pride.
The Supreme Court of the United States, the Promised Land, decides that it is now legal for marriages which cannot produce children to be made legal in every state. Not only that, but at the same time, Congress, for some unknown reason, decides that even after the big scandal with the whole the Planned Parenthood selling baby parts, right? Even after all that, guess what they did? They refunded Planned Parenthood for another 10 years, which means approximately another 50 million of our children will be killed before they ever see the light of day. Brothers and sisters, God doesn't even have to do what He usually does, which is have to have war to bring, to reduce the posterity. We're literally doing it to ourselves, through our unrighteousness. And then that brings us to the last thing. So what happens in the 7 more years? Well, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But if this pattern holds with a 7-year pattern, and if the land is the next thing, then stage 4, it's a little bit different than that. It's got 10 stages. This is just a 4-stage thing, I think, based on the scriptures. That's when people are swept off the land. God cannot allow wicked people to remain on this blessed covenant land. And that's what we're kind of looking at here right now. So that's basically the end of it. If God wanted to cleanse this land really quick, He could do just like He did with the Nephites. Those of you who haven't seen this presentation, I have a 2-hour presentation about the New Madrid seismic zone. It is very, very active. Almost every day now there are earthquakes going off on the New Madrid seismic zone that underlies the Mississippi River Valley. It's a very, very active fault system. This is what happened in 1811, 1812. Over the course of 5 months, there were over 2,000 earthquakes. 3 of them were 8.0 magnitude or greater, which is 10 times stronger than the earthquakes that flattened San Francisco back in 1906. This is what happened in 1811 and 1812. This is the New Madrid seismic zone. I don't have time to go into the details on this, but I'll just show you. These are sand blows. Massive changes in the surface of the earth. If God wanted to bring this nation to its knees in a literal heartbeat, this would be one way to do it. Interestingly enough, there was a similar sand blow. There was a similar event that happened on the New Madrid seismic zone here. Right there. There was a similar event that happened right around the time of Christ. So what we know is there was a massive New Madrid event that happened right around the time of Christ. Okay? And then Christ came. And then there was another massive New Madrid event that happened in 1811, 1812, which was about 8 years before, guess what? Christ came again to America with the first vision to Joseph Smith in 1820. Do you think it might be possible that when Christ comes again to America, that he might use the same catastrophic situation here? I think it's a very strong possibility. And it talks about the great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, Revelations, and other ones here. There's the blood moon. Solar eclipses are interesting. This is one that's coming up. There's a total solar eclipse that's going to be coming in next year, in August 21st of next year. This is kind of an interesting one. How many of you have heard of this already? Okay. How many have you not heard of this? Okay. The interesting thing about this particular one is that this is the path of the total solar eclipse. The blue line over here is where it's 100% blocked out, and this is where it's gets less and less percentage that goes out away from that. It's going to come in around Portland and then come out somewhere around South Carolina. Interesting enough, if you zoom up on this is Kansas City right here. Okay, you can see Kansas City. This is going to go directly over the top of an interesting place. What's northeast of Kansas City? Adamantium. So it's kind of interesting, but there's going to be a total solar eclipse that's going to go directly over Adamantium at approximately high noon on that day. Interesting? Again, I don't know what this means necessarily, but it's kind of cool. This isn't playing here for some reason. But basically, this is what it will look like if you were sitting on the moon looking at the Earth. The little black dot right here is the center of the moon. That's where the moon is going to be making a complete black. That's where the center of the moon is over that. This is the area that's going to be blacked out, which means that this will be one of the first times in the history of Earth that both of the promised lands will be in simultaneous darkness. Because one of the other ones is always in light, because Israel's on the opposite side of the earth. So one of the others always in the light as the earth is coming around. But in this case, Israel will be in darkness because of nighttime, and the United States, the entire North America, will literally be blanketed with darkness at the same time. Just another interesting little feature here. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like there. And let's see, that's pretty much the end of the, well, there's more, but bottom line is that we need to, this is the whole point of this thing. Let me get back to this. Can everybody read that flag? Read it. In memory of our God, our religion, our freedom, and our peace, our wives and our children. Guess what you just read? You just read characters off of the gold plates. These are actual characters that came from the anthem transcript and made into, so it looks like English. Okay, this is David Lindsley's and said, it's pretty awesome. But he said that it came to pass that when he poured out his soul to God, he named all the land which was south of the land desolation, yea, and find all the land both on the north and on the south, the land of liberty. A chosen land and the land of liberty. So this is again talking about the north and south thing, right? And then finally, The design of the Nephites was to support their lands and their houses and their wives and their children, that they might preserve them from the hands of their enemies, and also that they might preserve their rights and their privileges, and also their liberty, that they might worship God according to their desires. And thus he was preparing to support their liberty, their lands, their wives, and their children, and their peace. They might live unto the Lord their God, and they might maintain that which was called by their enemies the cause of Christians. Behold, whosoever will maintain this title upon the land, let them come forth in the strength of the Lord and enter into a covenant that they will maintain their rights and their religion, that the Lord God may bless them. Brothers and sisters, have you made your covenant with God? Are you willing to stand for this nation? For the liberty that we have had here? And that's my hope, that we can do this, because ultimately this is the final slide here. This is from 2 Chronicles chapter 7. Brothers and sisters, do you want to know how to save our nation? This is it. Because if my people, who is his people? It says, the people who are called by my name. Who are called by his name? Not just Christians, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I believe it's those of us in this room, it's those of us in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints he's talking about here. Because he said, we'll humble ourselves and pray and seek his face and turn away from our wicked ways. Then will he hear from heaven and will forgive our sins and will heal our land. Let us go forth in righteousness.
Signs in the football stadium.
It's not, people say all the time, well, what difference does it make, about where the Book of Mormon took place? Brothers and sisters, it makes a difference because we must understand the covenant that the Book of Mormon is desperately trying to teach us. And it's not just any old place. It is here. This is the land. This is the nation. This is the covenant nation. We have a divine responsibility to take the gospel to all the rest of the earth. And brothers and sisters, if this nation does not survive, what's going to happen, do you think, to the missionary force? You see, 80% of all missionaries worldwide come from one single nation, the United States of America. And fully 90% of all the missionary effort is financed by members of the church who live in this nation. So if this nation goes down, brothers and sisters, missionary work is over. And I believe that will usher in the second coming of Christ. Let us do everything that we can to preserve this nation, to understand the nature of the covenant, because whether we're members of the church or not, we are still under this covenant with God. Let's try to help warn our neighbors and tell our neighbors and let people know and wave that flag of liberty for our families and our children and our nation. Thank you for being here. Sorry, go forward.